night sometimes, but many times I would just be calling from 8 in the morning up until like 8:30 at night, 12 hours a day.
Wow.
And it was crazy. If we had customers that I wasn't dealing with myself, I would go to the restroom to call because people are like, wait, why is that guy calling about houses when we're in a car dealership? It made no sense. Or sometimes I'd go to the roof of the building, right? But I did that for 12 months before I got my first transaction. I was literally, I mean, I wanted to quit every single week. And one day I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to quit on the idea of quitting, and I'm not going to give myself that option. I'll just keep at it until something happens. And 12 months later, I got my first transaction. That made me about $45,000. I paid off all my debt. And from there on, it just started snowballing.
You are now listening to the Your First Steps podcast. It's great to talk about $1 million dreams, but where do we start? How do we get there? Listen up as you hear directly from real estate industry leaders on how they reach success in their fields. And most importantly, what were their first steps? Let's get this party started. Here's your host, Eli the Real Estate Guy.
All right, hey, how's it going, guys? Thank y'all so much for tuning into another episode of the Your First Steps podcast. Today we have another special guest. All right, and we are speaking with a multifamily investor, and it is Mr. Abbas Mohammed. Abbas, how you doing today, man?
Hey, Eli, I appreciate you having me on.
Yes, absolutely. So I actually found and I'm pronouncing that right, Abbas. It is Abbas.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. So I found Abbas online from following someone. His name is Ken Jocelyn, and I've been following him for about like a month or so. And every now and then I would just see different pieces of content that come about. But then there was one particular video. He was on stage and he was talking about, this person. It's like, man, this person, when you're talking about tenacity and really getting after it, there's this individual. He was cold calling and really working to get a deal for 13 months. And in my mind, I'm like, okay, for 13 months, he's going to say like, oh man, he was killing the game. Like things were amazing. He's like, he was cold calling for 13 months. And he didn't get not one deal. And I was like, wait, hold on. Where is the story going, with that? And then after that, he went on to say, after that, he started killing the game, became like a top producer in this area. And it was just that next level of commitment. I made a decision. I'm going to keep going. And after I saw that, I'm like, I got to find this person. So I went online, went on Google, went on all over the place. I found him on Instagram and I messaged him like, hey, like, I would love to have you on the podcast. So that's how I found him and that's how he's here. So thank you for
man. I appreciate you having me on. I'm excited to share.
Yes, sir. All right. So for the folks that don't know who you are, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I guess I'll start with the end. So nowadays, I'm a multifamily investor. And so what we do at Model Equities, we help people passively invest in apartment complexes. And so started that a couple of years ago because I needed a place to start investing. And then from there on, I started bringing in other investors with me. And so now we're at about $54 million in assets under management. And so that's my focus.
Gotcha. All right, cool. So now we know that you're in a multi-family space now. We know that you're bringing on investors to invest with you. But of course, things all start off from childhood. Yep. And what I found is everyone that I speak with, they typically have some links from their childhood that brought them to where they are now. So walk me through, what was it like in your household growing up? And then we'll slowly walk to where you are now. So what was it like when you were a kid?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think if you look at someone's childhood, a lot of times you could, and then see what they're doing right now. A lot of times you can understand why they're doing what they're doing just by looking at their childhood, because it plays a very big factor. And so for me, growing up, I was born and raised in Iraq, and we were extremely poor to the point where we didn't even have beds to sleep on. I remember as a kid, we would sleep on concrete because we couldn't even afford to have beds. And so I remember as a kid, I always hated that. I remember saying, look, the minute I could do something and work hard, I'll work hard to make money so we don't have to live like this, because everybody else lived way better than we did. And so after the Iraq war, At the time I was like 7, 8 years old or whatever. We lost our house and then we ended up moving to Syria, stayed in Syria for 2 years. Also, I mean, it was like seven of us living in a 500 square foot apartment. And after Syria, I came to the US when I was 11 years old. This was back in 2009. I was 11 years old. We had a house. It was a rental, $600 a month, and we couldn't afford 600 a month. We had housing assistance. We had food stamps. We didn't have a car. And so, just growing up, we're always poor. And so by the time I was 18, I was going to college and I was working as a used car salesman. And I just had enough of it. I'm like, you know what? I'll never make it in life if I stay, in the car sales job. And I don't want to work for somebody for the rest of my life, making $50,000, $60,000 a year. I want to do something bigger. And so at the time I was 18 years old, I didn't know anything about business, but I'm like, I wonder what business I could start. And after looking at the richest people in the world, what I realized is that most of them became rich because of real estate. So I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to think about it too much. They're way smarter than I am. So I'm just going to get into real estate. But now the question is, I don't have money to buy any real estate. So how do I actually get into real estate? So at the time I had a credit card and that credit card had $5,000 on it. And the cost of getting my real estate license was going to be about $2,000. So I was like, you know what? The only thing I could afford to do, and I didn't know it at the time, you could actually flip without your own money. You could wholesale without your own money. But I was 18 years old. I was a dumb kid. And so I'm like, look, I'm going to get my real estate license. And I see these agents. I'm in the Bay Area. It's a very competitive market, but I didn't realize any of that. And I think sometimes it helps to be ignorant because you don't know what's going to potentially stop you.
Absolutely.
But anyway, I didn't realize how difficult it was going to be. And honestly, if someone would have told me, I would have probably not done it. But I got my real estate license. And I thought I was going to make $30,000 a week selling these $1 million homes easily. But what I quickly realized is I quit my sales job. I quit my college and all that stuff. And I got straight in. I started knocking on doors from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. I didn't get a single lead, not even a transaction. I didn't get a single lead. Nobody even told me they want to sell their house because I was 18 years old. I was overweight. And I just did not fit the role at all.
Gotcha. Wait, hold on. I got to stop you right there because you said some good stuff right now. So, so you also did door knocking as well.
I did for 3 months.
For 3 months.
I would wear a suit. I would wear a suit, a tie and the whole thing. It was a very cheap suit actually, but I would wear the whole thing and nobody took me seriously.
Oh my gosh. I love it. Okay. Gotcha. Yo, continue.
Yeah. So my credit card maxed out, I didn't have any more money. And so I'm like, okay, well, I have to go make money somehow. So I went back to the job I hated. I hated selling cars. I was very good at it, but I hated it. And so I went back to selling cars and I was like, look, there are a lot of times where I'm not really as productive. I'm not really as busy. So why don't I figure out, I have two options. I could either give up on my real estate business, which at the time it wasn't a business. It was kind of like an attempt, I would say. So I could either give up on that or I could just figure out another way to make this work. And so I'm like, you know what? In between me not selling a car or talking to a customer, I'm just going to start cold calling because I could do that at the office when I'm not busy. So I bought a headset and I bought into this program that lets me call 3 people at the same time. And so I did that, started cold calling. And then about a couple of weeks later, I'm like, you know what? I'm not using my other ear. So what if I double my productivity by having 2 headsets on, each calling 3 lines at the same time, right? And so I did that, and then and I was like, I would get in the morning, like I would get into the office at like 8 a.m, and I would leave at like midnight sometimes. But many times I would just be calling from 8 a.m. up until like 8:30 at night, 12 hours a day. And it was crazy. If we had customers that I wasn't dealing with myself, I would go to the restroom to call because people are like, wait, why is that guy calling about houses when we're in a car dealership? It made no sense. Or sometimes I'd go to the roof of the building, right? But I did that for 12 months before I got my first transaction. I was I wanted to quit every single week. And one day I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to quit on the idea of quitting, and I'm not going to give myself that option. I'll just keep at it until something happens. And 12 months later, I got my first transaction. That made me about $45,000. I paid off all my debt. And from there on, it just started snowballing. I got my second transaction quickly after, then third. Within within a year after that, I was at the time I was 20 years old. I was making about $350,000 a year. It was more money than all my family had made combined, and it was a life changer at that moment. But
Gotcha.
then
So before you go to the next step, you said something that I feel like should be on a t-shirt. You said you decided to quit on quitting.
Yep.
Right. That is. Do you have that written down somewhere? Are you going to trademark that? Because that's awesome.
I should.
Right. Because it's powerful that you said that, because whenever people see folks working hard, whether it's I'll just use this as an example. You grinding hard, you going 12 months, cold calling, door knocking, doing everything that you can to get this transaction going on, and nothing happened. And it wasn't that you had some crazy motor or like some mindset to where it's like, all right, well, I want to, like, you never thought about quitting, you never, whatever. Every day you're like, man, this sucks. Like, I thought I was going to make all this money. Like, I'm seeing all this flashiness, like what's happening? And once you just decide to put your head down, you're like, you know what? I'm just going to just keep going. I'm just going to go. And so talk about that part. Right. Yeah. Because I feel like that's something that, folks would like really get a lot of value from. So take me through, like, when you first came in. I know you're saying that, okay, I'm going to make all this money. When was that moment to where it's like, you know what? I don't know if this is going to work out. And then what pushed you to be like, I'm just going to keep going?
It's actually interesting. So I had very high expectations when I was going into the business, because I would see these people on social media post about how easy it is and how much money they're making. Later on, I realized they're all full of crap, but I didn't know it at the time, right? And so I went in, I had super high expectations. 2 weeks in, I was door knocking. I wasn't getting anything. And I remember that was kind of like the first time where I was like, wait, what am I doing? Is this even a thing? Does this even work? So I started like questioning it very early on, because my expectation was very high. And so now one of the things I've realized is to always keep my expectations very, very low, because it keeps the potential of failure lower. Because then, like, if I go into something, I'm like, hey, I'm expecting to see results in a month. And if I don't see results in a month, I might quit when I could have potentially seen results in 6 months. Right. And so I've just changed that mindset where it's like, I just want to see if I'm getting any traction at all. And if I know if I'm getting any traction at all, then I could fix things up over time and get it to where I want to get it to, right? So I'm not as concerned about time nowadays as I used to be, where I wanted everything to happen immediately. Nowadays, I'm like, okay, as long as I'm seeing some movement, then I'll keep at it until I fix it the way I want.
So what was some movements that you saw during that time? Because of course, like you're saying, people would say, hey, if I don't get a deal in this amount of time, that I'm done. But what were those things that you saw, like, oh, okay, well, this person didn't cuss me out, so maybe this track. So what are some of those things that happened?
So, I mean, when I was door knocking, you got to remember, I didn't even get a single lead, right? But what I did notice is that I was able to keep people at the door longer. I was able to have conversations with people. And I started realizing, like, okay, I'm getting better and better at conversing with people about real estate. Later on, when I started cold calling, what kept me going is that I was getting leads that were saying, hey, I'm going to be selling in the future. And I remember everybody was like, dude, I don't know if a single agent that sold $1 million house through a cold call. Like, you got to get realistic. This is not going to work out. You're literally risking, failing in this business. Now, the people that have said that, I now, later on, I made way more money than they had, right? But at the beginning, it's like everybody's against you. Everybody's saying, look, this isn't going to work, until it works, and then people start to try to copy the same things you've done, right? But the point of it is, the point is, I started getting leads, and those leads, I would notice, they're getting closer and closer and closer to selling. And so I just knew, look, at some point, one of these leads that I'm generating is going to do their first transaction, and then it's just going to, snowball from there. And that's exactly what happened. It just took much longer than I expected. It took 12 months.
Gotcha. Yeah. So that first transaction, you say you made 45,000 on that transaction. Yep. So what, walk me through that lead and how you got it to close.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I got a call, and this guy's like, hey, Abbas, you've been talking to us forever, and we're actually ready to potentially sell our house. So we're interviewing some agents. So wanted to give you a call and see if you might be interested in joining. And so I'm like, sure, yeah, no problem. I'll come out. And obviously I played it off like it was no big deal, but inside I'm like, Jesus Christ, this could be the opportunity that's happening, right? And so I remember my at the time I had a mentor who I paid I paid the mentorship fee on a credit card. I always tell people when I started, I literally hired a mentor on my credit card. But anyway, I called up my mentor. I'm like, hey, this is what's happening. What should I do? So he's like, I need you to do this. I need you to charge X amount percentage on the transaction. Don't discount yourself, and all these different things. And so I went in, I just explained everything the way he wanted me to do it. And it worked out, and gotcha. They signed and they're like, at the end, they're like, you seem like you've done this a lot. This isn't your first rodeo. And I'm like, I'll just stay quiet.
Gotcha. He's like, oh, it does seem like that, doesn't it? Yeah, go ahead and sign right here. Gotcha. I love it. So now something that I know was a big difference in everything that we did when it came from wholesaling to now flipping, and now we have a rental, and our next step is to get into the multifamily space. Now, what caused us to go to those next steps was always getting some type of mentorship or a course or learning. So what type of information did you get from that mentorship that allowed you to be like, okay, now this is working out, and now I'm able to utilize this and rinse and repeat when it comes to these transactions?
It's interesting. I've always been very big on mentors and throughout my life, because the way I look at it is this: if somebody spends 20 years or 30 years of their life learning a skill and they're willing to teach me that skill for a fraction of what it costs them to learn that, then it's a no-brainer. I could take one person's entire life experience and literally just get it in 6 months and learn exactly what they're doing right now after all the mistakes, after all the time. So that's what I did when I first started. I hired a mentor to teach me how to do sales. And he was phenomenal. He took me up, with his program and his education. I was able to get to 350,000 a year. I was 20 years old at the time. So I was doing pretty well. But here's the other thing I've learned with mentors over time that I always keep in mind is that just because somebody is good at one thing that they could mentor you on doesn't mean they're going to be good at every other aspect of your life. And so I always keep that in mind, because I realized at the time I would call my mentor, and I'm forever grateful for him. But I just realized that at some point I couldn't learn from him anymore. But I remember at one time I'm calling him. I'm like, hey, let's just call him Bob for right now. I'm like, hey, Bob, I'm doing this and it's working out. It's better than I ever thought. But how do I keep increasing? Because I feel like I'm now getting stuck at 350 because I can't work more hours. I was doing 16 hours a day. And he's like, dude, he's like, listen, I mean, you're a college dropout, you're 20 years old. Like you got to be happy with what you're doing. You're doing well. Don't change anything. Stay at it over 20 years. If you keep making what you're making, it's going to snowball. And I'm like, I get it. But I also see people making way more money that were working way less hours. So I'm like, there has to be something different. And so eventually I started looking at all these other businesses, and I realized that the biggest businesses in the world have two things in common. Number one is they all have systems and operations, right? Nothing is done just, well, it depends on how we feel that day type of thing, right? My business was run that way at the time. Everything was based on my gut feelings. And I that was a mistake. The other thing I realized about big businesses is that they all have employees. And at the time, I was the only employee in my business. So I brought up that idea to my mentor, and I'm like, hey, I want to hire employees. I want to set up systems. He's like, dude, if you try to do that, I'm going to remove you from my program because this doesn't align.
Jeez.
I know. It was a little bit kind of harsh at the time, but yeah. So I'm like, listen, I'm like, look, I appreciate it. I understand, but this is the route I want to go. And so I'm going to start hiring people and all that stuff. So I started hiring virtual assistants. This was at the end of 2019. I hired my first virtual assistant from the Philippines. And, what's interesting is that 4 or 5 weeks later, she started producing as many leads as I was producing, right? She was doing really, really well. So I'm like, interesting. maybe this was a fluke. Let me try and hire another virtual assistant and see if this happens again. So I hired another one, same exact thing. She started doubling my leads again. Then I hired a third one. And so all of a sudden now my lead production went up 4 times, right? I quadrupled my effort. And so then I'm like, this is very interesting. We're getting way more leads. I know leads eventually will turn into transactions. Remember, just like my initially when I first got into business.
Right.
And so in March of 2020, at the time of COVID, I had 3 people. And at the time, we didn't have any result from their leads yet. They were just leads. None of them have materialized because it was only like 4 months in. But COVID hit. And when COVID hit, I remember everybody was downsizing their business. They were firing people. They were letting people go. And I'm like, that's interesting. Everybody's letting people go. Everybody's business is getting smaller. I think this is going to be the best opportunity for me to grow my business. And so what I did is I hired a hiring manager and I said, your job is to hire people nonstop. Even if I tell you to stop hiring people, you keep hiring people. I mean, unless I fire you and I stop paying you, then you keep doing it. And so she's like, all right. I mean, if you want me to do that, I'll do that. I'm like, you just keep doing it. Don't worry about what I tell you otherwise.
Where'd you find this hiring manager? Was this a Philippines?
She was also VA. She was also VA because when I first started hiring people, I was hiring people to do cold calls because that's what took me the most amount of my time. Then I realized after I outsourced cold calling, hiring people was taking me the most amount of time. So I'm like, I need to get somebody to do the hiring for me now. And so she started hiring people, and we went from 3 employees to having 12 employees that year. And I was able to triple my net income that year. I went from 350 to 750 in that year. And then the year after, we went from 750 to 1.7 million in profits. And so just doing the exact same thing, but we went up to 25 people. So what happened is I hiring cold callers. Then it was a hiring manager. Then I'm like, okay, now we're hiring a lot of people. I'm having to train them. That's taking up too much time. So then I hired a training manager. Then I'm like, okay, well, that's doing well, but I'm on the phone following up with all these people that want to set appointments with us, and it's taking up too much of my time. So then I hired salespeople to do those calls. And then eventually I hired an agent and exited the business. And so now it's completely passive. But and actually, like last month, we made about 100,000 net from it, completely passive, which is pretty cool stuff. This month we're gonna do something like that or a little more. You know, they have 5 million in under contract right now. But anyway, the point is, I just learned how to get myself out of the day-to-day operations, and now that business is. I became top 50 in the country with Remax and all these different things, right? But in 2021, I got bored. I'm like, I hired 25 people. The whole business is operating really well, but I feel like I'm useless now. I don't feel like I'm getting challenged anymore. And so that's when I started investing in multifamily, because at the time I had about close to $1 million in cash in the bank. And so at the time I was 23 years old. And so I'm like, look, I mean, I don't want to spend the rest of my life just, operating, doing nothing. I was micromanaging people just to keep myself busy. Right. And so I realized I wasn't really moving the needle that much anymore. So anyway, what I started doing is I started investing passively in multifamily. And then I started actively buying multifamily deals. And so in July of 2021, I bought my first deal. It was 64 apartments in Dallas for $6.5 million. And we raised $2 million on that deal. And then after we closed it, I bought another deal that was $30.5 million. It was 194 units also in Dallas. And we raised $8 million on that. So within 6 months of actively doing it, we acquired $37 million of assets. And you know what I liked about it more than anything is how challenging it was. It was very, very difficult to find these deals, negotiate with the brokers, close the deals, raise the equity, and all these different things. And so to me, it was kind of like I started feeling blood flow through my veins again, right? Because it was challenging. So I like that. Right. And then in 2022, my goal was to buy 4 more properties. But the problem is, for the first 6 months, the market was way overpriced. And so I'm like, look, I'm just going to sit on the sidelines because I don't have to buy if I don't feel like the market is good. So I just stayed on the sidelines. Prices were sky high. And so in July, when prices went down, I got another deal under contract. and we closed that in December. That was 12.8 million. So now we're at about $54 million in assets.
Gotcha. I love it.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So when it
yeah.
came to marketing to sellers, so when it comes to finding your deals, what do you do as far as your lead sources to actually find these properties, vet them, and actually make offers on them?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So, well, we listed those properties just to clarify, right? We didn't really write offers on them, but what we did is it was cold calls. So we would target people that had below average income, that lived in below average median household prices in the entire Bay Area. And the reason I targeted those people is they tend to not have a network of agents that they could list with. And so we would reach out, build relationships with those people that are interested in selling. And then at some point when they're ready to sell, who's the guy that's been mailing them for years now, building relationships? I am. So then they call me, and that's how we built the business. Eventually, when I was exiting the business in 2022, last year, I realized having an operation like that of 25 people, we were doing literally 150,000 calls per day. Because we had a system that was dialing 12 people at a time, 2 times per person, and I had 25 people, 8 hours a day. So it was dialing a lot of people. And so I'm like, this is not going to be able to sustain itself passively. So I literally reinvented the business from scratch. We started doing online leads. I rebuilt the entire business model. And then when I reinvented it, obviously it was slow at the beginning for like 3-4 months, and then it started skyrocketing, and now we're having some of our best months ever. So I had, but what's interesting about business, and I've done now this in model equity, my multifamily business. Once you learn how to build the foundations of a business, rebuilding the business is a lot easier because you already know how to get from zero to a certain amount of dollars. And so I've been able to do it twice in the sales business. I've now been able to do it in the multifamily business. And recently we started a mastermind for people that are interested in learning how to actively buy multifamily deals. And it's the same process. It's like the same process. I'm able to scale it up so quickly. We've been able to get, in a month, we are now at close to 20 members. And, it's a process. Business is repeatable. If you know the process, it's repeatable.
So if somebody wants to join that mastermind, what do they have to do, or where do they find the information?
Yeah, I mean, the best thing to do is I always tell people is let's book a call, see if it's the right fit for you or not, because I've had a couple of people that wanted to join, but I realized like they just want to invest passively, which if you just want to invest passively, you don't need the mastermind or pay for any of that stuff. But if you want to actively buy deals, then yeah, it's booking a call is kind of the best thing to do. And that way we could see if it's the right fit for you.
Gotcha. All right. And so I know when you're talking about sellers, you're talking about like single family properties, but when it came to the multifamily and you actually marketing to the owners of them and finding those multifamily deals, what was your process of finding those multifamilies?
So I actually did it differently. So, one of the things I learned later on in life that I also want to share is that the best way to, get into something, have success, is to find other people that have done what you want to do and then just modeling after their business. And that's why I named my company Model Equity, by the way, because I never want to forget that lesson. Anytime I want to learn something new, I'm like, who has done this that I could either hire or I could go learn from and not have to reinvent the wheel from scratch. So when I started looking at some of the biggest companies in multifamily in Dallas and other markets, what I realized is that they built relationships with brokers, and they didn't compete with brokers by going out and trying to get the deals on their own. And so that's what I did. And because I was a broker myself, it was easier for me to build those relationships. So I would actually go out, and when I want to build these relationships with brokers, I didn't go after the senior agents. I went after the junior people that just got in the business because they didn't have networks. They didn't have relationships. So they would give me time versus the senior agents. They were too busy. They've already got their own people, and they're not going to deal with somebody that was brand new. So when I first started, I would go to the junior agents. I would take them out to lunches, to dinners, to events, all these different things. And that's how I built the network. I remember my first big deal. My first deal was 6.5, but my first big deal was 30.5 million. And I remember the agent was like, he's like, Abbas, listen, if you fail at this, you're gonna ruin my reputation. And he's like, well, our company does half of the business in Dallas. You'll never get a deal from us again. I'm like, dude, I will work day and night to make sure
Right.
that we close this with no problems. And we had a lot of problems, but he never heard of them, and we closed on time.
There you go. Okay. Now you mentioned Dallas several times, right?
Yeah.
So is Dallas your primary market that you go into? And if so, why is that?
Yeah, so Dallas is definitely my primary market. I like it a lot. And the reason is because I have four main criteria when I look at markets. Number one is I want to see population growth. I want to see people move because, real estate is all about supply and demand. And so if there's a lot of demand, automatically, naturally, you're going to get appreciation, you're going to get rent growth and all these other factors, right? So population is number one. Dallas has had the highest population between 2010 to 2020, right, per the census data. So to me, that was an easy winner. But the other thing is it has a lot of job growth. A lot of companies are moving to Dallas. They also have a lot of rent growth, which is one of my primary criteria. I want to see rent growth. I want to see appreciation. But then finally, it's very landlord friendly. And you could say that for the entirety of Texas, right? It's very landlord friendly. So it fit every single criteria that I had.
Gotcha. All right. Yep. So population growth, rent growth, landlord friendly, and job growth is the main things.
And then I want to see rent growth and appreciation as well. Historical rent growth and appreciation.
Gotcha. All right. And so if so I know that's your primary area, but what are some other locations that you're looking into that you would recommend? Like, hey, this is also a good spot to look into.
Yeah, I really like Nashville. Nashville is getting about 200 new net residents per day, which is, I mean, that they're a town of 1 million people. So that's actually a really good number for a city that small. So Nashville is phenomenal. I like many Florida markets like Jacksonville, Orlando, Tampa. You just have to be a little careful with, the hurricanes and all these different things, right? Insurance costs is through the roof, but I really like those markets as well. Tucson, I like. Phoenix, I like. But one of the things I'll tell you about Phoenix, for example, is that a lot of times during recessionary times, they don't perform as well. And quite recently, when prices went down, they had some of the biggest drops in pricing. So that's why I'm always a little careful with Phoenix, but I really like it as a market.
Yeah. Why did they drop as far as value? What was going on with that?
It's because so Phoenix and Vegas drop in value because a lot of their, for example, Vegas, a lot of their income is based on tourism. And so during economic hardships, people don't, go and spend as much money there. And so that's why. And Phoenix is kind of similar, historically drops a lot in value during recessionary periods, but they've had a lot of different jobs and different companies move there. So I thought this time it was going to be different, to be honest with you, but it wasn't. It had the same pattern. When prices went down, they went down the most.
Gotcha. Interesting. So, okay. So it's interesting that you say that because I was reading a book. I think it's called like the best apartment syndication book ever or whatever. Something like that.
Joe Fairless.
Yeah. And he was explaining how the way that you'll do research on these particular markets, you'll look at everything that you pretty much just said, population growth. And one of the things that he said was looking at the industries that are the most prevalent in that area. And if one particular industry or one particular company provides the majority of the jobs, then you have to look at, okay, how likely are they to either move or to be affected by anything that could happen. So as I was doing research on these different markets, I'm from the Orlando area. So I'm like, okay, well, Orlando will be a good area, but Orlando is basically tourism, right? So Disney, Universal, these theme parks or whatever. And so as I was doing research on things that are happening there, I realized that because most of it is tourism for a short while, statistically it was supposed to suffer, but what also happened is that a bunch of people was moving to Orlando. So it, like the stats are like super weird. And so I'm trying to figure out like how does that affect other areas? So I think Ohio, I'm not sure if it's like Cincinnati specifically, but I know they're big into like education spaces and something with like some tech. items. So I guess, what do you look for as far as industry, as far as diversification, and what would you stay away from as far as industries?
I would stay away from one trick pony type of locations where it's like just one big industry dominating the whole sector, the whole market. And if that industry was to go down, then the whole market collapses. I'll give you an example of that is like Odessa, Texas, right? Odessa is very reliant on gas and gas prices. And so when gas is doing well, right, gas and oil is doing well, the apartments are filled, the rents are going through the roof. And then when gas is not doing so well, then you see 70%, 60% occupancy in some cases. The rents drop like crazy. And so you want to stay away from those type of places because it's like you just don't know. You don't want to gamble with your money or your investors' money, more importantly, right? And so I would rather pay a premium to be in a good market that's stable, right? And where there's a lot of population growth. There's like, if something was to happen to one of the major companies in Dallas, I don't think anybody would notice because there's so many of them, right? So it's just like whatever, right? Moving on next, right? And so, but I know like in some areas they have these huge factories, you know, from these different companies. Like if that one factory was to go out of business, well, the whole population works for that company, and so then it's kind of screwed. So I stay away from what's called a secondary and tertiary market because those markets tend to be overly reliant on just one business.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. And so when it comes to property management, I've heard different pieces of information, but the main thing that I've heard is as you get into larger apartments, of course, you got to have dedicated property management that stays on the property. But if you're doing smaller things like 10, 15 units or whatever, then just hiring an outside management would suffice. What's your take on, I guess is a double-layered question, starting off with smaller apartments, that's like 10 to 20 units, and then how important is it to have property management that's actually on the location?
Yeah, I think it's, well, the latter, having property management on the property is very important because they'll be able to manage it way better than anybody who's not on the location, right? So I highly recommend finding properties that have that. Now, for those properties to be able to afford someone to stay on site, you have to have 50 units or larger, in some cases even 60 units or larger. So what I always tell people, I will highly recommend that you just start at 50 units or bigger. And the biggest thing that people get, you know, they can't wrap their head around is like, well, you know, I want to work my way up through to that. Like I'm going to do single family, then I'm going to do duplexes, then fourplexes, then eightplexes. And to me, that's a complete waste of time. You'll spend 10 years of your life doing that. You'll hate your life. And then you're eventually going to get to the 50 units, maybe, unless you struggle a lot and just give up on the whole thing prior. Gotcha. So just skip that whole mess and get straight to the 50 units. And I can tell you from my experience, we have, for example, I'll just give you our first two properties. One was 64 units. The other was 194. The 194 units is actually much easier to manage than the 64 units. Why? Because at the 194, we have multiple employees. And so at the 64 unit, we only have two. And so it just makes it much easier to manage. So then people are like, well, you know, I mean, I don't know how to do that. It's like, and I get that. I completely get that. But you get education, you get mentorship, right? You find other people who have done it, you learn from them. And that's what I do every time I want to learn anything. Like if I want to learn about apartments, I went to a mentor, and then I went to other people that have built billion-dollar companies because that's what I want to do. And then when I want to learn how to speak, I went and paid somebody to teach me how to speak, right? Do public events and all these different things. And so that is the fastest way to compress time and skip over all the learning and the education that you will have to suffer through for decades. I remember when I first wanted to get into multifamily, I called this broker, and he had like, I think it was like a 20 unit apartment complex, small, right? And I'm like, I can't remember his name. I think it was Andy, but I'm like, Andy, you know, it says that you need proof of funds, right? Do I need to have like $2 million in the bank, or like how, or can I raise the money? And he's like, dude, you're way over your head. You got to start with the duplexes, the fourplexes, the eightplexes, and then eventually maybe come back in 10, 20 years, then start buying these 20 units. I'm like, dude, that's a waste of my time. I'm not doing that. So then I learned the process, and my first thing was 64 units, right? So it's like, and to me, like looking back, I'm like, thank God I didn't follow that advice.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So now when it comes to so with property management, how do you identify a good property managed actually let me back up. When you first come into a property, do you first look to see if you're going to keep them or not? And then from there you like slowly exit them out, or what's your process
Yeah, no,
with
I
the
mean,
management?
generally speaking, you exit them out at the time of purchase, like before purchase. You have your new management company come in, they give you the new expectations of how the property is going to be run and all that stuff. Now the question is, how do you find a good property management company? Because that's very
Right.
important. And so
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you the way I do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that if I'm looking at a property, I go online, because to me, nowadays, most tenants are trying to find these properties online, right? The days of just
Mm-hmm.
having signs and word of mouth are long gone. And so
Right.
I go online on these leasing websites and I would see what companies are advertising their properties online in that same area. And so then I look at these properties in the same neighborhood and I would see, what are the rents like? If I call them, do they pick up the phone? What are the reviews like? Right. And so when I call, I don't know, some people might see this as a bad thing, some might not. I just pretend to be a tenant and I say, hey, I'm looking to potentially rent in this area, wanted to see what the rents are like. And so depending on how they handle the call and how they treat me, then I decide, okay, this is a company I might actually want to potentially hire. And if I do, and I actually am serious about the property, then I fly in, I see the property, and then I go visit those competing properties, pretending to be a tenant to see how they handle a potential tenant in person. And if they pass all the questions, then I would call them, ask for budgets, ask for pro formas, and then potentially hire them. But that's the way I do it. To be honest with you, I just pretend to be a tenant because that gives me the most raw information out there. Otherwise, if you just tell them, hey, I'm looking to hire you, everybody will say the same thing. Everybody will tell you how
Right.
great they
Right.
are. And you don't find out until after you hire them, but then it's too late.
Yeah, exactly. So, okay. So now you mentioned going out and flying to these properties. Would you recommend starting off with the area that you're in, or would you recommend just going and looking at areas that has the most growth potential and that fit your buy box and just going out to them? So I guess what's supposed to
Yeah,
work to you?
I will say this. I mean, the biggest benefit of investing in multifamily to me is the fact that I get to choose the markets that are in the path of growth, that are benefiting from population growth and appreciation. And so where you live may not be the best market. I live in California. I live in San Jose. I would never buy in San Jose. It's a terrible market for
Mhm.
investors. It's a very anti-landlord state. And so I wouldn't do it, to be honest with you. Now, the question is, if you buy out of state, how do you manage the property out of state? And so again, you have
Mhm.
property management, but then you also could partner with people that live in that location that could then, help you with that. And so to me, the multifamily business is all about relationships. It's all about
Mhm.
having connections. And so when I started, I didn't have any relationships, by the way. So if you don't have any, that's completely normal. Everybody starts at zero. But then you
Right.
just have to understand, how do I find these people? How do I build relationships? How do I work with others, so that way we can all buy bigger properties than me just, doing everything on my own, buying a crappy little deal by myself.
Mhm. Gotcha. And so now with whenever you're so I'll start off with this example. My wife and I, whenever we're flipping properties, we have a particular look that we use. So whether it's a certain type of tile, we use the same type of paint, same type of everything when it comes to our flips, because we know what people like and we just do it over and over and over again. Now, I know with multifamily, there's certain improvements that you can make, and it's not just the unit itself; it's outside, it's certain exterior improvements. What are some things that you do that's sort of rinse and repeat, and things that are area specific?
Yeah. No, I mean, great question, because it's all about scalability, right? And so you want to
Mm-hmm.
be able to scale it. And so to me, that's why I was able to grow my sales business, because I made it so scalable, so easy to, hire people, implement other things. And that's why I grew. And so it's the same thing in multifamily. So in multifamily, the first thing we look at is operational deficiency, meaning, is the current owner not operating the property at the highest level? I'll tell you an example. We just bought a deal. It was 12.8 million,
Mm-hmm.
um, 80 townhouses in Dallas. And the story on this deal is, it was built in 1984. The current owner makes a lot of money. He owns a very successful construction company. And so he just bought it, to park his money somewhere, right? And it's been 5 years. Dallas has had a lot of rent growth, and he put one of his construction company employees to manage this property. And it's like, we looked at the property and the average rent was like $800. I went to the other properties nearby and they're at 1,500, 1,600 per unit, very similar units. So I'm like, you know what? First of all, before we do anything, we're going to renew all these leases at 1,500. That's the first thing we're going to do. The second is we're going to update these units as the tenants move out. And so the way we update units is we have a specific package, and it's the same, everywhere, right? It's the black appliances. We put back splashes in the kitchen. We change the flooring. We paint the property. We change the cabinet doors. All these different things, right? And so that's what we did. And then we add things like Wi-Fi. We might add things like a tech package, right? Depending on the property. But the biggest thing is it's either going to be a cosmetic update or it's going to be an operational deficiency that the current owner is having. But you have to have a story. And if there's no story, meaning if I buy a property and there's no way for me to really add value to the deal, then I'm not a buyer for that deal.
Gotcha. All right. And so what are some red flags that you've seen whenever you go into a property? I know if there's no value add, then you're not touching it. But what are some other red flags that you go into a property and you're like, oh no, I've seen that before. No way.
Yeah. My first question when I visit a property is, would I feel comfortable living here? Right. I lived in apartments myself, right? When I didn't have any money and I was, starting out. And so, I lived in really crappy apartments, and I remember how these were operated and what used to happen at these places. And so I'm like, I don't want to deal with tenants that will cause issues. And so the first thing I ask myself is, would I want to live here? Because if I don't want to live here, then I'm not going to get the type of tenants that I want to deal with, and my life would become much, much harder. I'm going to have evictions all the time. I'm going to have a lot of issues. So that's my first, criteria, not just for the property, but also for the neighborhood. Like, I look at the neighborhood, I'm like, would I feel comfortable being in this neighborhood? Could I go out at night and go shop? Is it close by? Is there a school close by if I want to send my kid to school? I don't have any kids, but if I did, I want that. Is our jobs close by, or do I have to drive for an hour to get to the closest job locations, right? Is it easy to get on the highway? So all of these different things I look at. Like, I don't personally invest in low income neighborhoods because, and I get the whole thing with opportunity zones and all these tax benefits, but when you deal with lower income tenants like that, you just have a lot more evictions, you have a lot more headaches. And this may or may not be the politically correct thing to say, but I'm just telling you this as an investor. It's not worth it to deal with all those headaches. I'll leave that to somebody else. I want my investors to get cash flow consistently. I want them to get appreciation, and I want them to make money. And I also want to improve the tenants' lives. Like, when we go into these properties, we're taking them up from where they're at to a much higher level by, putting in, like this property I just told you about, we're going to spend about 700, 800,000 in rehab. So everybody's life is going to get much better. Right. But the point is, like, I don't want to gamble on my investors' money.
Right. I feel you. And so now, with the types of properties that you're going into, because you're saying that you want to make sure that you feel safe. And so I'm assuming, are you going for just B and C's, or are you going to A's as well?
Yeah. So currently, I would my biggest focus is B class. Okay. More than anything else. I will look at C plus assets, but I have to see a really good story. Like, the price has to be really good. Like, we're looking at the deal right now and it's substantially below market price. So I may look at it. Right. So those, would I do A class? Maybe in the future, but not right now, because there's a lot of supply that will hit the market over the next 2-3 years. And so that supply is not going to affect as much the B class and the C class. They're going after the higher income tenants. And so they're going to compete with other A class. And so to me, I'm personally staying out of that unless it's, way below replacement cost and it's in a really good location where they're not building, much around it. Then that could be different. Right. But I would say, in my opinion, the safer approach right now is B class properties, because the people that can't afford A class because of economic hardships, they're going to go down to B class. The C class tenants are going to get squeezed the most, unfortunately, because, if they lose jobs or whatever. But the B class is kind of the most well insulated, in my opinion.
Gotcha. Okay. And so with B class being the primary spot that you go with, what are some other criteria that you have as far as your buy box for that, whether it's price, location, like what are some things you're looking for?
I want to be 50 units or larger, just because of the fact that, we said you have on-site management. I want the area income to be 40,000 or higher. Why is that? Because when I push rents up, I want to make sure that the tenants could actually afford it. So I want them to get at least minimum 2.5x the rent, right? So if I'm pushing rent to 3,000, I want the average tenant there to be making at least $7,000-8,000 a month, right?
Gotcha.
Just as an example. So that way they could afford it. But then I also want to make sure it's close to jobs, close to schools, close to all these shopping, all these different things. I want the deal size to be minimum of 10 million or higher, because to be honest with you, it takes the same amount of work to do a 20-30 million dollar deal as it does to do a $5 million deal. So if I'm going to do a deal anyway, I might as well go after bigger deals. So yeah, I mean, that's my criteria. Dallas, obviously, that's my number one market,
Gotcha. And so as far as your syndications, whenever you're finding a property and you're packaging, something together, whether it's a like acquisition fees, the preferred return, what does your package look like whenever you're presenting it to investors?
Yeah. So, I want my investors to be able to double their money over a 3 to 5 year holding period. Now, obviously, there are no guarantees. Every deal is going to be different, right? And we may do better, we may do worse. But I want investors to double their money in 3 to 5 years. And part of that is I also want them to get cash flow. Like, I'm very big on cash flow, because cash flow adds safety to the deal. If you have a property that's not cash flowing and you're underwater, you're going to lose sleep at night. And so I don't want to do that. I'm very low leverage on deals. I tend to be very risk averse. Like I'm always very, and that's in business, but also in investing, obviously. I want, like right now when we're looking at deals, we're doing 50% leverage, 60% leverage, right? So our income in relation to our debt is much lower. And so that gives me a lot of comfort. So I want them to get about 5-6% in cash flow consistently every month. And I want them to be able to double their money in 3 to 5 years.
Gotcha. Okay. And so, so every month you're paying out payments. Okay. So not a quarterly. So
when I started, it was quarterly. Now I do every month.
Got it. Okay. That's exactly what I was going to ask. Cause I know with your first deal, did you partner with other syndicators to get that started?
Yeah. So on my first deal, I met this guy who lives in Dallas who had a lot of experience managing assets. He's been doing it since 2012, but he never did syndications, but he managed multifamily. And so I'm like, listen, let's partner up on deals and do something together. And so we bought our first property together. We bought the second, the third together. So we've worked, together since then. But yeah, I mean, I add different GPs to the deals depending on what I need. And the larger the deal, the more GPs you're going to need. But here's the thing I tell people. It's better to have partners and do bigger deals than to do everything yourself on a small deal, because that's just too much work. It's not worth it.
Gotcha. And so I know you've went from the sales side of being an agent, and now you're an investor, syndicating, doing things of the multifamily space. You've done the B class. You said eventually you'll do the A. What's next for you? And in the space of real estate or just in business, what's something that you're looking to do next?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. I really enjoy business for the sake of business. Like I literally read market reports at 12 o'clock at night. The first thing I read, by the way, I have a bunch of reports that come to my email. The first thing I read in the morning is market reports. Like I just enjoy real estate. I enjoy business. And so I just want to keep growing that. To be honest with you, I want to see how close can I get Model Equity, my multifamily company, to a Blackstone. And I know we have a lot of time, right? Steven Schwarzman, when he started it, now they have about 900 billion in assets. When he started, he was 45 years old. So I have a lot of time before I get to that. And so to me, that's kind of like the golden standard. Is I want to see how close I can get to Blackstone, Brookfield, or any of these other huge companies.
Gotcha. I love it. All right. And so now those market reports that you're getting, which reports are you reading or that you have subscriptions to?
Yeah, a bunch actually. I mean, a number of them, but one of them is called CRE. I forgot the exact name. I could pull it up right now, but
Mhm.
CRE, I read CoStar reports every day because we have a subscription to CoStar, and so they
Mhm.
send us market reports. CRE Daily is one of my favorites. There it is, CRE Daily. I highly
Mhm.
recommend that one as well. CoStar News is another one that comes in every morning. But yeah, those are the major ones.
Gotcha. And so with that, what's significant about those two ones that you read? Because of course, you know, you're getting multiples, and each one is giving you a different set of information. So what's significant about CRE and CoStar separately?
Yeah, so CoStar, I read a lot of local market information that pertains specifically to Dallas
Mhm.
versus, like, for example, CRE Daily or Bloomberg or any of these other things. It's more macro level. And so that way I can understand what's happening with other asset classes. I can understand what's happening on a national level and all these different things because I always want to keep my eye open. Hey, should we eventually add in self-storage? Do we eventually add in retail? Should we eventually add in all these other things? And so I'm just kind of always tracking these different
Mhm.
things in the back of my mind. I don't want to get into other asset classes yet, but eventually I will. And so it's good to have that information so that way we're knowledgeable enough to take action when we're ready.
Gotcha. Gotcha. All right. And I'm assuming the same thing for CoStar
Yep.
is the
Well,
same thing.
CoStar, I
Gotcha.
want to understand because see, Dallas to me is my number one market, but that's not
Mhm.
always going to be the case. What if the fundamentals change? So I always want to keep an eye out on what's happening. We look at the numbers frequently in terms of job growth, population growth, all these different things, rent growth, appreciation, because it might be the number one market now, but in 2 years, maybe Nashville is the number one market, maybe
Mhm.
Phoenix is. So that way, I could adapt and always just go where I see the puck going, right? And not just kind
Gotcha.
of sit and wait just because, oh, we've been in Dallas for too long, whatever, we'll keep
Mhm.
at it. I don't like that. You know what I mean?
Gotcha. Right. Right. So what are so that's a interesting statement. So what is a and I'm not sure if the if we've if you've been in the game long enough to have seen a city go from bustling to you want to stay away from this, or have you seen that to where it's like, hey, this is a spot to go to, and then you start seeing some indicators like, you may want to stay away from that city because it looks like it's
Well,
about to
I'll,
get
I'll give
shaky.
you an example of a local market that I experienced, and that is San Jose, the Bay Area, right? The
Mhm.
Bay Area markets have always been doing really, really well. But then what happened is, in terms of not just not rental, but like just owning properties in general, it's been doing really well. Obviously, landlord laws have always been crap, and
Mhm.
so that's just part of the thing you get with California. But there have been a lot of appreciation. There's been a lot of rent growth. But then what happened is over the past couple of years is that the reason we had all that appreciation and all that rent growth is because number one, we had a lot of population growth. We were one of the fastest growing, states always. That's why our population is so big. But the
Mhm.
other thing is, and we had a lot of inward migration. But the other thing is, we had a lot of jobs. We had a lot of companies that would start out in the Bay Area, and so that always was super super helpful. But then what happened over the past couple of years since COVID is that a lot of
Mhm.
people started leaving and a lot of jobs started going virtual and remote. San Francisco is like they have, I read like they have 39% office occupancy now. It's
Oh
like a
my
ghost town. It's crazy, right?
gosh.
And so
Jeez.
I know it's insane. And
Yeah.
so jobs started leaving elsewhere. People started leaving elsewhere, and so the market stanked, and the prices have been going down for a very long time ever since. And so to me,
Uh,
like that shows me why you always want to keep your eye on what's happening with laws, with jobs, with population, because this stuff could change very very quickly if you're not keeping your eyes open.
gotcha. Now, is there a certain point to where you'll look at San Jose and these types of areas that are on this crazy decline and be like, you know what, it's starting to get to that price point to where things are getting a little interesting and maybe I should, look back at it. So do you foresee that happening within the next few years or
Well,
it's like we're still far away from that?
Well, the thing about California, Washington, Oregon, all these other states is number one is they're very anti-landlord. So that to me
Mhm.
kills. Like, I don't care what the numbers are. If it's
Right,
anti-landlord, I'm out. I'm done.
right,
But
right.
but the other thing is I never want to be I never want to be the first person that tries to catch the bottom. I want to see consistent growth for a long time before I would feel comfortable, putting my name, my reputation, my brand on a deal in those type of markets. So like,
Gotcha.
San Jose probably is not going to be on my list for a very, very long time, if ever.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Understood. All right. So I'm big on books. And I feel like it's important to educate yourself, of course, with courses, mentorship, YouTube videos, but having books that teaches you certain skills to me is very important. Like right now, I'm reading this book, YouTube Secrets, learning about how to do better content and doing things like that. And so, what are 3 books, or you don't have to limit them to 3? What are some books that you would recommend someone that wants to get into either being an agent or being a multifamily investor? What are some books you would recommend?
Good question. I'm actually not very big on books personally, not because I don't believe in them. I just don't have, I don't know. I just don't read books, to be honest with you. But I'll tell you the books that I have read that I've really liked. I'm not a big believer in reading a bunch of books without applying the knowledge. Like sometimes the whole thing about reading a book a week, I don't know if that really matters or not, to be honest with you, because it's like, are you actually applying the knowledge if you're reading that fast? And a lot of people are not. They're just checking off the box. So I read the book once every like quarter type of thing. And so my favorite all-time book is Whatever It Takes by Steven Schwartzman. He's the guy that started Blackstone, and he's worth about $35 billion right now. Very successful guy, obviously. Started when he was 45, and he details the story of how he built Blackstone. One of the things he says that's really interesting is he says, look, it takes as much time and effort to build a small business as it does to build a big business. So if you're going to build if you're going to build a business, you might as well build a big business. And I completely agree with that.
Right. I love it.
So there's that. Another book I really like is Good to Great, but that's kind of a classic. Everybody knows about it. Steven Schwartzman book, Whatever It Takes. Surprisingly, not a lot of people have heard about it. So
I've never heard of it either. So I'm definitely going to order that tonight.
Oh, it's phenomenal. And I really like this book by Alex Hormozi. It's $100 million CEO, where he talks a lot about marketing, ads, sales. I think that's one of the best books I've read for sure.
Gotcha. So what did you like about that book? Because I have it. I haven't read it yet. So what is it really about? And what was great about it?
You mean Alex's book? Or?
Yeah, Alex Hormozi, yeah.
Yeah, I like how he really explains how to copyright well and how to set up ads and how to attract people, and I think it's very, very useful. Now in my business, we're really not doing a lot of sales. Like a lot of it is just content, adding value, so that way eventually when we have a deal, people invest. But it was interesting because we do a lot of events, weekly events and summits now and all these different things. And so I was able to apply a lot of the techniques I learned when I promote my events. And so that helped us gain more traction as a result.
Gotcha. So with the weekly events that you're doing, what are some things that are unique to those events when it comes to attracting people to them?
Yeah, so we just teach people how to buy multifamily real estate, both as active or passive, and it's completely free every week. It's consistent, and I've paid $0 in ads, and it's growing. Like we started doing those about, what was it, like 3 months ago, I think it was, and the database went from 0. I started a brand new database just for those events. We went from 0 to now we're over 2,000 people in literally just 3 months. It's exploding. Over the past month, we had 34% growth in number of contacts. And they're free. The free events that people are getting every week from us are better than some of the stuff that they pay other mentors for. And so that's why it's growing so rapidly. And so that's been working out really well. I'm also hosting in-person events. We just hosted our first summit. We had 760 signups on that. Again, $0 in ads, which is really cool to see.
Yeah. So let's talk about that summit for a little bit, because I know I saw it. I saw the advertisement. Well, not the advertisement. I saw it online.
The post.
The post for it. And I signed up, but I was at an open house on the weekend. So I think it was like a 2 or 3 day event. I had an open house on Saturday and Sunday, and it was during those times. So I'm like, man, I want to get, this information and to really see what it's about. So what is this summit all about? And just kind of give
Yeah,
explanation of what it is.
so we wanted to bring in people that bought $1 billion or more to basically teach people how to do it, right? I'm a big believer. If you want to learn how to do something, you want to learn it from someone who's done it. And so I want to build $1 billion company. And so I'm like, look, I want to bring in people that have done it because number one, I want to learn how to do it from them directly. Now, a lot of these people, I've copied their models just by researching what they do and going deep into it, right? But I wanted others to see it firsthand from these guys. So I brought those in. I brought in some of the biggest brokers in the business to talk about what's happening in the market. I brought in, some of the top SEC attorneys to talk about how to raise funds legally and all these different things. And so what I realized over time is that if you build a good product, and by the way, an event is a product. If you build a good product, it will almost promote itself. Right. And like, that's why I was able to get so many people without really doing as much work on the promotion, because I did a lot of work on bringing in the right people, putting in the right, event and everything. And so that kind of took care of the promotion for us. The fact that we had some of the heaviest hitters, and that wasn't easy to pull together, to be honest with you. I worked on it for like 4 months to get all these peoples and their different schedules, because obviously these people are very busy, and so to get them at the right schedules and all that stuff was not easy at all. And but it worked out. It worked out really well.
Gotcha. I love it.
And it was completely free. It's funny. He's one of the people that was on. He's like, dude, I've been to a lot of events like this where I paid a lot of money, and I haven't had a fraction of the value that I got from this free event.
I love it. I love it. See, and that's something that I've been thinking about when it comes to, different types of education that I put out there. So of course I have the videos that I put out on Instagram about this is how you find, your first deal. This is how you speak to motivated sellers. This is how you market, like all these different things. And then I have the ebook that I put out there. But as far as a vision of what I want the brand itself to be, the Your First Steps brand, is I want it to be basically the introduction to someone who wants to get into real estate, right? And it's like, okay, I want to get in. So what does that mean? Do you want to be an agent? Do you want to be, a flipper? Do you want to be like whatever it is? And so I want people to come in, but there's times to where I feel like there's that mental block in a lot of people to where it's like, wait, hold on. If it costs, I don't know if I would do it. So let me just spend all this time on YouTube and maybe I'll just kind of absorb some information. So what made you decide to not charge for things and just go that route of, let me just make it free to attract people to it?
Yeah, so it's interesting they asked that, because I completely understand what you're saying, and the fact that when it's free, sometimes people don't take it as seriously, and I've come to that realization. That's why, like, for the mastermind, I decided to charge for the mastermind, but it's like I made sure it's very high quality, but I want people to first trust us before they pay for anything. The problem with having an overall paid event is like, even if it's $10 or $20, they're like, well, I don't know if I believe this guy will deliver, on whatever I'm paying for, even if it's cheap, right? Because to them, paying is paying, whether it's $10 or $1,000. And so when you set it as a free event and you over deliver by the highest standards that they had, you over deliver and make it an amazing event that they all participate in, then it's like, okay, I could charge for whatever it is, I want to charge for, and people will trust me because they see how much I worked on a free event, let alone a paid thing that they decide to go through with. So, people will believe that you will help them if you actually help them, right, up front without asking for anything. And then when you make the ask, it becomes a lot easier. Gotcha. Now, I do want to say that some people are all about, hey, we'll just keep giving and giving and giving without taking anything. And I would love to do that, but at the same time, you've got bills to pay, you've got expenses to pay. And so you have to charge for some things, and those things better add a lot of value to people. But there has to be a balance. You don't want to be on the side where everything is paid, because then you're not going to attract anybody because you haven't added any value yet. But in my opinion, and I've tried the model of everything is going to be free. I actually tried it for a year. I literally was like, we'll do everything for free, super high quality. And to be honest with you, I realized that there were a lot of people that wanted more, but they couldn't get it because I couldn't afford to give more because I was already giving so much for free. And so then it's like, okay, like the mastermind thing, I had so many people want to learn how to buy multifamily, but I'm like, guys, I don't have the time to like do one-on-one coaching or even group coaching because it's like I'm busy building my business, right?
Right.
And so then I had to charge for it to justify spending the time to set it all up. And now the people that are in are super happy. But yeah, you have to charge for some things, but you have to keep other things free to kind of keep the top of the funnel open to get trust, add value, and then charge in the back end.
Gotcha. I love it. All right. And so now we're going to the segment of the lightning round. Right.
Yeah.
So it's just a few questions, nothing crazy, but there are just a few questions I thought that would be pretty interesting for you. So you kind of answered this first one, so I'll change it up a little bit. So if you could only buy apartments for the next 10 years in one city that's not in Texas, where would it be?
Harder. I don't know why you threw that in there.
I knew you were going to say Dallas. So I'm like, all right, hold on. Let me change it up.
Good question. I would probably choose Nashville.
Okay. And why is that?
I mean, it's a very stable city. They've had a lot of job growth, a lot of population growth. The state itself is very, it's landlord friendly, and so that, and also doesn't have a lot of hurricanes and all these different issues that some cities in Florida have. Not saying that Florida is a bad market; it's a great market, but that's another component you have to worry about. And so, to me, it's stable, nice, growing, right? So, yeah, Nashville, I would say probably would be my choice.
Gotcha.
If I can't choose Dallas.
If you can't choose Dallas. Okay, gotcha. All right. So second question. If you were not in real estate, right? So on any capacity, agent, apartment investor, on like any level, what else would you be doing?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's, man, God, that's a very, what's up with all these hard ones? I don't know. You know what it is? To me, real estate is a vehicle of business. I enjoy business. Real estate is the vehicle that I could be in business through. And so it could be anything really. I enjoy real estate because I'm now an expert at it, in my opinion. Obviously there's always more room to grow. There's always more to learn, but I have a certain level of expertise, and I would hate to start over in a different industry, but I could do it in any industry. I like solar, for example. I like roofing, all these other industries because they have high margins and they're scalable and all that stuff as well.
Got it. So it's interesting. I said not real estate, but you was like, okay, solar. That'll go on houses.
Real estate. Same thing with roofing.
Gotcha. So even if it wasn't real estate, it'll be real estate, basically. Okay, I got you. All right. So last question. If you can go back in time to your 18-year-old self, right? And let me ask some more restrictions on it. You could only speak to them for about, let me not do that. You go to your 18-year-old self and you can only speak to them about, the future. What advice would you give your 18-year-old self to prepare him for what's to come?
Well, number one is it's gonna be way harder than you think. I don't know if I would tell him that, though, to be honest with you. I want him to just kind of keep trying, not knowing how hard it is, because a lot of times, like I said, if you know how hard something is, you might give up before you even try. So I don't know if I would necessarily say that, but one of the advice I would give is hire people sooner than you think, because I probably wasted a year of my life not doing what I could have been doing had I hired people sooner. So I would say hiring people sooner. I would have also highly advised to start investing in real estate sooner, because I learned how to make money, right? But I didn't learn how to invest it until much later. And so I just had cash. I'm like, I don't know what to do with the cash, right? Nobody ever taught me how to invest, right? Again, I didn't come from a family that was like that before. And so I had to waste a few years with just cash doing nothing in the bank, because to me, I'm not the type that would go out and spend a bunch of money on things. I just kind of said. And so anyway, that hire people, invest sooner, think bigger, like when I first got in, I'm like, God, if I could make as much as, because I live in the Bay Area, and so like these people that work in tech companies make like, 150 to 100, 250. And I remember my mentor, when I first got in, he's like, dude, one day you're going to be able to buy $1 million house, and you're going to make more than these tech guys. I'm like, God, that's not possible. How could I buy $1 million house? Do you know my background? So like, if I was to go back, I'd have thought much, much, much bigger,
Gotcha. I love it. And you said something earlier that I thought was very interesting. And I 1,000% agree. which is ignorance is on some level a gift, right? When you're younger, on some level, you don't know any better. So you just try things out. And you don't think about if it's too big or how hard it's going to be. It's just like, I want to try this thing. Let me just go for it. So with your success, what was that? Let me frame it perfectly. What would you say to a young person? So not young you, but just people that's out there that's young. What advice would you give for them that wants to start, whether it's real estate or just any type of entrepreneurial endeavor? Like what is some words of advice?
What I would say, look, whatever it is you want to do, you have to understand it's going to take 10 times minimum, 10 times more work. So if you think you're going to go into something and like put in 10 calls to make something work, you're probably going to need thousands, right? If you go in something and you're thinking, hey, I could send 1,000 flyers and get a deal, you're probably going to need 100,000 flyers, right? So it's going to take way more work than you actually imagine. That's number one. And so 10x, 100x, how much work you're going to put in. That's number one. The other thing is, you want to set the target much higher, because when you set a target that's much higher, then it helps you understand where the bottlenecks are in the business. And then you could solve the bottlenecks. So it's like, okay, I want to build Blackstone. Why can't I go build Blackstone next year? Oh, well, because I can't raise billions of dollars in equity. Not because the deals aren't there, but I can't raise billions of dollars in equity in a year. So, okay, now I know the bottleneck in my business, I could easily tell, is I can't raise that money. So I need to hire people to help me with that problem. Okay, so now we could raise a lot of money. Why can't I build Blackstone? Oh, well, we don't have enough relationships with brokers in multiple markets to get those deals to deploy that capital. So again, the point of this exercise I'm doing is I'm just showing you, when you think super large, it helps you understand what really is the bottleneck. Because a lot of times we think things are a problem. Then when you think much bigger, you're like, no, if I fix this, it really wouldn't fix the issue. Like, would fixing my website actually get me more customers? Not really. The website isn't the issue. Is it the business card design? No, that's not the issue. Because if you could fix this other issue that we're not actually talking about, none of this other little crap that you're bringing up matters, right? Exactly. And so I noticed this happens a lot with business owners. They focus on the little stuff, not the big stuff, because the little stuff is easier to fix, right? But anyway, so work way more, set much larger targets, and then have very low expectations. Have very, very low expectations, because that will help you not give up. If you have very large expectations, you'll tend to give up much quicker if you don't hit those expectations.
Gotcha, man. Abbas, that was amazing. Thank you so much for doing this podcast, man. This was been a pleasure. This was great. Yeah, absolutely. And so for the folks that want to follow you, that want to find your ebook and just wants to really follow whatever you're doing, where should they go to find you?
I would say the best way is to make a free investor account and book a call with me. You don't have to invest in any deals, but that way we could book a call. You go to modelequity.com/invest, modelequity.com/invest. Then you just fill out your information, and then you could book a 15-minute call. Would love to get on the phone and talk about you and what you're doing.
Gotcha. All right. Awesome. Hey, thank you so much, man. I appreciate it.
Man. I appreciate you having me on.
All right. No doubt.
Thank you for listening to the Your First Steps podcast. Let us know what you thought about this episode by leaving a review. And don't forget to subscribe.